Before we start today's story, we would like to inform you that a friend of ours has started a YouTube channel where he has picked up the story, A Sniper's Fight for Survival, and has put up a different version of the story. Please head out to his channel. The link is in the description box. So, head over there and help with a like and a subscribe. Now let's start with today's story. That night, everything came crashing down. We were lying in bed, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of Linda's phone. She was scrolling as usual when a video popped up. I watched as her expression shifted from relaxed to horrified. She gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth, and her phone slipped from her fingers, landing on the bed between us. The video kept playing. It was me, with her best friend, Kelly. The angle was unmistakable. The scene left no room for doubt. And the audio, well, it made everything crystal clear. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, grabbing the phone and shoving it in my face. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Instead, I met her eyes with a slow, measured look and said, "It's exactly what it looks like." She shot up from the bed, her voice a mix of rage and disbelief. You cheated on me with Kelly? Are you insane?" I stood up calmly, smoothing out my shirt like this was just another ordinary moment. "You're upset. I get it," I said, my tone steady, almost soothing, but screaming won't change anything. Her fury was uncontrollable. She grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and hurled it at me. It smashed against the wall, missing me by inches. "You scum sucker. How could you?" I didn't react. I just watched as she paced the room, her face twisting between fury and devastation. "Do you even care? Do you even realize what you've done?" I tilted my head slightly, my calm demeanor only stoking her rage. "Of course I do. But maybe you should think about why this happened." Her tear-streaked face twisted in disbelief. "Don't you dare turn this around on me. I didn't do anything to deserve this." I shrugged and sat back down on the edge of the bed. Maybe not. But you might want to ask yourself why I'm not angry, Linda. Why I'm not throwing things or screaming." She froze, her chest heaving. The fury in her eyes wavered, replaced by something else, confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" I leaned back, my gaze steady. "Figure it out." The room was thick with tension. Her breathing was shallow as the weight of my words settled in. For a moment, she looked like she might say something. But instead, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. She didn't stay away for long. Minutes later, she marched back into the room, her face still red with fury. "You're seriously going to sit there and act like you're justified? Like this is normal?" I remained seated, calm, collected. "You want answers, Linda? Fine. Let's talk about Kelly. Let's talk about everything." She stopped mid-step, her face twisting with pain and rage. "Go ahead. Tell me why you ruined our marriage. Tell me why you slept with my best friend." I folded my hands in my lap, leaning back slightly. "It started a few months ago. She came over one night while you were out. Said she was feeling lonely, that she needed someone to talk to." Linda's lip curled. Her fists clenched at her sides. "And that somehow led to you screwing her?" "It didn't happen all at once," I replied, my tone maddeningly even. "At first, it was innocent, talking, listening, being a shoulder to cry on. But one thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were in the living room, on the couch where you and I usually sit." She flinched, like I had slapped her. But I wasn't done. "Not yet. It wasn't just once, Linda. It happened again, and again. At her place. At our place. In your car. Even." I paused, letting the words sink in. She was enthusiastic. "Let's put it that way." "Stop," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Just stop." But I didn't. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "She told me things about you, Linda. Things you confided in her. How you felt lonely. How you missed the way things used to be between us." I let that linger before adding, "She used your own words to justify what we were doing." Her legs wobbled, and she sat heavily on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "You're a monster," she whispered. I scoffed. "Am I? Or am I just the man you made me?" My voice rose slightly. "You think I didn't notice, Linda? You think I didn't see the texts, the late-night calls? Oscar wasn't as clever as you thought." Her head snapped up, her face suddenly pale. "Oscar has nothing to do with this, doesn't he?" I said, my voice dripping with venom. "You think I didn't notice how you lit up every time his name came up? How you suddenly had so many errands to run?" Her silence was deafening. And then, quietly, "You had no right." I barked out a laugh, standing abruptly. "No right?" I shook my head. "You gave me every right the moment you decided to sneak around with your high school sweetheart." Don't stand there and act like the victim, Linda. You're not innocent. She stared at me, tears streaming down her face, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I leaned in, my voice low and cold. Now you know, Linda. Now you understand what it feels like. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs the only sound in the room. I stood there for a moment, watching her crumble, then turned and walked out. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I didn't leave the house. Instead, I sat downstairs in the living room, the cold glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. My mind wasn't racing. It was calm, methodical. Everything had led to this moment. After what felt like hours, I heard her footsteps. Slow, hesitant. When she finally stepped into the room, her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with the kind of anger only betrayal could ignite. You planned this, didn't you? She hissed. I tilted my head slightly, gesturing for her to sit. Do you really want to know, Linda? Do you really want to hear how much I know? She didn't sit. She stood there, fists clenched, trembling with rage and pain. Tell me, she demanded. If you've already destroyed everything, at least have the decency to explain why. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped together. All right, let's start with Oscar. Her face twitched, her breath hitching. What about him? I know about the texts, Linda. The late-night phone calls. The secret meetings. She shook her head violently. You're lying. You don't know anything. I let out a cold chuckle. You think so? I followed you, Linda. Every time you said you were running errands. Every time you claimed to be working late. I saw the two of you at that little cafe downtown, the one with the corner booth you always liked. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I continued. I saw you holding his hand, laughing like a couple of love-struck teenagers. I saw you kiss him, right there, in public. Her knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the back of a chair for support. You're insane, she whispered. I let the words hang between us for a moment before answering, my voice like a blade. Am I? Or were you just sloppy? I leaned back, watching her. Do you remember the night you came home late, claiming you had a big meeting at work? I watched you walk into his apartment, Linda. I waited outside for hours. And when you finally came out, I paused, my gaze locked on hers. Your hair was a mess. Your clothes, wrinkled. She was shaking now, her tears falling freely. Why are you doing this? Why are you telling me this? I stood, towering over her. Because you deserve to know how it feels. You deserve to know that every smile you gave him, every kiss, every touch, it was all being watched by me. She collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. I leaned down, my face inches from hers. You broke us, Linda. Not me, you. And now, you get to live with it. Her sobs filled the room, her shoulders shaking violently under the weight of my words. For a moment, I thought she might collapse, but then she looked up. Her eyes, bloodshot and wild, burned with a mix of desperation and fury. You're sick, she spat through her tears, her voice trembling. You've been watching me like some kind of psycho, following me, taking notes on my every move. I shrugged, unfazed. I had to, Linda. It's not like you were going to tell me the truth, were you? You think I wanted this? To see it all unfold, piece by disgusting piece? She slammed her fist against the armrest, her rage boiling over. You had no right. You're just as guilty as I am. I snapped. My voice, sharp and unyielding, cut through the room. Am I? Tell me, Linda. Did I sneak around behind your back? Did I betray you first? Or was it you who decided our vows didn't matter anymore? You turned us into this. She recoiled as if struck, but I didn't let up. I refused to let her regain control. Do you know how many nights I sat outside his apartment, watching you? Wondering if maybe, just maybe, I was wrong? Praying it wasn't true? I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. But it was, wasn't it? Her lips quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might try to deny it again. But instead, she whispered, Why? Why didn't you just confront me? Why go through all of this? I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Because confrontation wouldn't have been enough, Linda. I needed you to feel what I felt, the humiliation, the betrayal. I wanted you to understand what it's like to watch someone you love give themselves to someone else. She shot to her feet, swaying slightly, her body barely holding her weight. You're a monster, she hissed. A manipulative, heartless monster. I stepped closer, forcing her to meet my gaze. Maybe, but I learned from the best, didn't I? Her face crumpled. She turned away, stumbling toward the stairs. But just as she reached the first step, I called out, my voice slicing through the silence like a blade. This isn't over, Linda. Not even close. She froze, her back to me, shoulders tense. What else could you possibly do to me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I smirked, though she couldn't see it. You'll find out soon enough. The sound of her footsteps faded upstairs, leaving the house steeped in an oppressive, suffocating silence. I waited, and then, with deliberate slowness, I retrieved the envelope I had been saving for this exact moment. Minutes later, Linda returned. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes flickering toward the envelope in my hands. I sat on the couch, tapping it lightly against my palm. What now? She asked, her voice hoarse, thick with dread. I gestured toward the chair across from me. Sit. She hesitated, but eventually sank into it, her trembling hands gripping the armrests. I leaned forward, holding the envelope out to her. This, I said smoothly, is the final piece, Linda. The last chapter in our little saga. Her fingers fumbled with the seal, tearing it open. Papers spilled into her lap, legal documents. Her eyes darted over the words, scanning them in a frantic blur. Then, as realization dawned, her mouth fell open. Divorce, she croaked, barely above a whisper. You're divorcing me? That's right. I leaned back, my calm demeanor only fueling her panic. And if you keep reading, you'll notice something else. Her gaze snapped back to the papers, flipping through them with growing urgency, until she stopped. Froze. No, you can't do this. Oh, but I can, I replied, my tone ice cold. Everything we own together, every bank account, every asset, it's all mine now. You're left with nothing. She shook her head, tears spilling freely. We built this life together. You can't just take it all. I exhaled slowly, my voice slicing through her protests like a blade. Actually, I can. And I have. While you were sneaking around with Oscar, I was making sure every asset, every investment, was shifted into my name. You signed the papers yourself, Linda. Do you remember that? Or were you too distracted by your little affair? Her face twisted in horror as the weight of my words settled. You set me up, she whispered. I didn't hesitate. I did. She stood abruptly, her entire body trembling with rage. You're evil, she hissed. You destroyed everything. I rose to my feet, towering over her. No, Linda. My voice was steel. You destroyed everything. I just made sure you paid for it. Her sobs shattered the silence like broken glass. And for a fleeting moment, I almost felt something close to pity. Almost. But then, I remembered the nights I spent alone, watching her betray me. And just like that, the pity vanished. Sign the papers, I said coldly. Make it easy on yourself. Or don't. Either way, it's over. She collapsed into the chair, clutching the documents to her chest as if they were the last remnants of a life she no longer recognized. I took a step toward the door, then paused. One last thing. Her tear-streaked face lifted, eyes hollow with despair. I met her gaze, unwavering. I sent the photos of you and Oscar to his wife, Rebecca. I figured she deserved to know the truth. You can thank me later for that little surprise. Her mouth opened in shock, her breath caught somewhere between a sob and a scream. You're done. I finished for her, my voice sharp, final. I'm done. And now, so are you. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving the ruins of what was once our life behind me. The cold night air hit my face, and I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt freedom. True, unshackled freedom. 7 months later, I sat on the patio of a small cafe, the late afternoon sun warming my face as I stirred my coffee. Across from me, Kelly smiled, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time, genuine care. It had been months since my divorce from Linda was finalized, and though the process had been long and messy, I had come out of it stronger. Linda had fought tooth and nail to stop the divorce, claiming she had made a mistake, that we could work through it. But the evidence was undeniable, and no amount of tears or regret could undo what she had done. In the end, the judge saw through her theatrics, and the divorce was granted on my terms. Every financial move I had made while she was sneaking around with Oscar paid off. She walked away with nothing but the clothes on her back. And Oscar? He dumped her the second the affair came to light. As soon as his wife received the photos, she filed for divorce, and Oscar, realizing Linda had cost him everything, turned his back on her. Linda had called me a few times after that, her voice desperate, begging for another chance. But by then, I had already closed that chapter of my life. Kelly reached across the table now, her fingers brushing mine. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked softly. I exhaled, shaking my head with a chuckle. "Caught me. You don't have to let her live in your head anymore, Ethan," she said, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "She's the past. I'm here now." I smiled at her, feeling something I hadn't in years: peace. Kelly had been a friend for a long time, someone who had always been in the background of my life, offering quiet support. After everything with Linda, she had been there, not pushing, just listening. And slowly, I had realized that what I felt for her was more than friendship. "I'm glad you're here," I admitted, squeezing her hand back. Her smile widened. "Me too." As we sat there, enjoying the quiet hum of the city around us, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was truly free. Not just from Linda and her betrayal, but from the anger and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. Linda had lost everything: her husband, her lover, her comfortable life. She was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. And me? I had gained something far more valuable: a fresh start, a chance at real happiness. And maybe, just maybe, with Kelly by my side, a future worth looking forward to. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.